me approach this a different way. Y'all are familiar with the 23rd Psalm, and Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. That word righteousness is the word zedekah. And righteousness in a Hebrew concept includes serving the widows, the orphans, the poor, and the priests. Because often the priests are poor too. They call them the quartet of the, oh, you're good. The quartet of the vulnerable. We have not done a good job explaining to you that every time you see the word righteousness, God is looking to see if you'll do all three of the I's on the way to love. In an affirmative way, it's another way of saying love and all of the other good things that we're about. But God's love is an amazing love that really helps people and serves. The three I's are, you can't be for idolatry because God wants you to love him only. You can't be about immorality because he's got commands that'll line you up, but most of us stop right there. You cannot be insensitive towards the quartet of the vulnerable. Widows, orphans, the poor, and the priests. When they cry, he hears their cry. So that when Jesus gets this wonderfully negative question that Jesus uses in such a deliciously positive way, who's my neighbor? After Jesus has reordered the priority of the greatest commands, so that you'll realize you got to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind and your strength, and you got to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Jesus takes this question, used to trap him or used to whatever, and he goes, I'm going to bring him right back to love in the affirmative and the three I's in a more kind of negative way, but a good negative way to say it. Sometimes you got to look positive and negative. Sometimes a no is a good thing. A don't do. And so Jesus says the Good Samaritan parable. I'm going somewhere with this. He says, whoever you find on the way, broke, busted, and disgusted, beat down, knocked down, and left out, on the way to church, that you don't get off of your high donkey. They didn't have a donkey then, but a high horse. It was a high donkey. And it was that. You see what I mean? It was actually, that's corny, though. That's real corny, ain't it? And help, even if it makes you unclean or late to service, or you might miss it. You're really missing the fact of righteousness. And you're not just missing righteousness, you're missing where I am. Because inasmuch as you've done it into the least of these, you've done it to me. I'm in the ditch. And then he wonderfully said, guess what? The pastor got it wrong because it was a priest and then who was a Levite. And then it was just a Levite who was probably not serving in leadership, but the highest leadership, and a priest. Priestly. But the one that got it right was who? The other. The one you look down on. Oh, Jesus is messing up a whole bunch of things. Please hear the cry. Don't get lost at, well, I think this person's a little too negative against whites, or why do we have to do so much to, I'm already doing a little bit. When you hear from people who look like me, who look like us, give you this cry, in a sense, we're really saving your lives. In a sense, we're really bringing you to church. In a sense, we're helping you, if you'll hear us, to be led by him in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Because you can't do Zedekah without being sensitive to the quartet. And listen, I'm in a group. My sister's in a group. We're the last, the least, the lost, the left out, and the locked up in a Christian country. I crack a few jokes. I have some friends, but at a certain point, I'm going to get prophetic, and I know you're going to leave me. But I'd rather be alone. Because at the end of the day, I go, hey, we can't have racial reconciliation by just you putting your arm around me, and I'm going to put my arm around you, and we're going to pray, and I love you, brother or sister. You love me. I'm going to take you to that place you don't want to go. I'm going to tell you about Zedekah and Mishpat. Mishpat is the other part of justice. Mishpat says, you got to go out and help fix the problems that caused the quartet of the vulnerable. And they usually go together. Like the scripture that says, let justice roll down like water, and righteousness like a might. Zedekah and Mishpat together. So as you're hearing us, please understand that our God is a God that you can't be right with unless you not only put him first and come out of an idolatry problem. You not only live right, come out of an immorality problem, but you have to be sensitive to the poor.
Thank you, Reverend Doctor. So we want to flow a little bit more, right? We want to. No. You're good. No. That's the gospel, man. Thank you. That wasn't for you, Doctor. I'm saying more so. We want to kind of open it up, and I know we have a little bit more time to have some Q&A from everyone here. And Doctor, maybe you also have a question or two, but we would love to just open it up. I don't know, Caenisha, did you have something you wanted to say? And we can have more of a conversation.
I think where we're going with it, I've lost track of time a little bit. How much time do we have? Somebody help me out.
10 minutes.
10 minutes. 15? I think we'll move in the direction of an open conversation, but really gesturing towards perseverance and hope. And here's the thing. I don't want to be... I'm going to try to condense this to 30 seconds. Stephen Colbert has a hilarious interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates, and he wraps up the interview. Ta-Nehisi Coates, his wonderful book, Between the World and Me, which is you should all read it. It's a tragic lament. But at the end of the interview, Stephen Colbert on The Tonight Show says, well, do you have anything hopeful for us? He asks him, because this is a hard book to read, can you give us some hope? And Coates just says, no. And the audience was nervous laughter, and Colbert says, well, I'm not asking you to make something up. And Coates says, well, I would have to make something up to answer your question. And so I don't want to be Colbert here to say, I'm going to ask you to just give us something hopeful to send us on our way and feel good so we can, but I want to gesture in that direction. And sometimes the hopefulness is just saying, I just got to sit with the lament and sit with the difficulty. But I think we want to move towards perseverance. And we're going to get there by this evening. We may not get all the way there in 10 minutes, but can you point us in that direction?
Yeah, that's good. I would say the two things, as Dr. said, that the righteousness and the doing of justice flows from the spirituality of our identity. We're righteous, therefore we do righteousness. It's the same coin, but two different sides. And the hope that I get is when I look at Psalm 73, as Asaph is just these wicked people are living fat. And where are you, God? In Psalm 73, verses 25 through 26, this is the hope that I get from the scripture to persevere. He says, who do I have in heaven but you? And there is nothing on earth I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Our portion is going to have to be God and his love and his grace. It cannot be hate. It cannot be the snarkiness and hating the Pharisee, because that's when you become the Pharisee. But it is the continual eating upon God as our strength of our heart and our portion forever. He's got to be our portion. He's got to be the one that sustains us. He's got to be the true bread, the true food. And that's what I would offer you, the one who offered himself, the true portion, the true bread.
Our hope is in, I think, God being glorified, you're being edified, and the devil, as we say, being terrified or whatever other fight. And so there's hope that y'all, because you're here. You're here. There's so many people now waking up to this stuff and starting to figure it out. And in their own way, doing something with this and really becoming more righteous. And so I'm really hopeful that we're getting better and better. And y'all are part of that betterment. So I'm just glad to be here around you.
I don't know if I'm your hope girl, but truth. But what I will say is that I hold hope, of course, in my faith, and part of that is the hope of the kingdom. And coming out of Corinthians and knowing that we are to be the body of Christ. And what that means to me is that it's not all on me. And that when we learn how to work and how to function and be as a body, that for me, we're working towards that. We're always a work in process. We're becoming, and that's hopeful to me. I think personally, in terms of moving through and sustaining, even in hard context and circumstances, is for me in further in Hebrews 4 to know where it says that we have a high priest who can sympathize and can relate to our weaknesses and do so and was without sin. But because of that, we can boldly come to find grace and mercy in our time of need. And I think what I have learned in these spaces is because of those pieces, in terms of knowing I'm one of a part of a full body, and that I have Christ's enduring spirit in me, is that I can be in my place, and as I'm building my awareness about who I am and learning to become and learning to be unapologetically me in any context, but especially in knowing that I may need to, what that means for me is I may need to choose my battles and choose my battles carefully. And like what I see this manifesting in different ways as more people are becoming aware around injustices and around what they can do is that they can enter into this conversation at different levels and enter into action. And I have a program where we quarterly discuss issues of race and ethnicity and reconciliation and diversity. And one of the encouraging things coming out of it is our dominant students coming out as white students saying, hey, as white students, we can actually talk about this as white students and may not need a person of color, like at that point in time, to begin a conversation. And so that, I think, is encouraging, and to know in terms of in choosing my battles that it's okay if I have to take a break and rest out because I'm tired, but I can do so knowing because there are other people who are in this fight, who are in this journey to take that place. And I think that was even the place for me on that Sankofa where my friend was able to step in, and say, hey, tag team, you're it. And part of that too for me is also not just knowing different ways in which I'm taking a step out. Sometimes for me and my students, it's me knowing in humble obedience that I'm not necessarily called to lead, and I'm called to support my students. And so letting them, encouraging and supporting them, empowering them to fight a battle that maybe I have been chipping away at, but knowing that they can maybe do more progress than I can in that moment. Or being able to know when I'm going into context, know my context and being aware of that, and knowing when I'm called to be in a place to maybe be a token place where I may not unapologetically, may not be able to be myself and be able to say what I need to say. I'll call out this panel just briefly to say, hey, I'm only a woman up here. But I knew that going in, but I also knew this about this space, that I can come and bring my full self, I can challenge, and I can be myself and my full self here. And so those are the things that even amidst when there is some place of tokenism in that, I know that I can say yes to this because this context is grace-filled.
Great, thank you. So I think at this time we wanted to hear more from you. You have any questions or comments for us?
Hi, my name is Kyla. And actually, this is kind of a follow-up from what Caenisha said. At least in my context, and I'm a biracial individual. I'm half white and half Chamorro, which is Pacific Islander. But for a lot of us in this room who might not be black nor white, I feel like navigating the conversation of where our place is so hard in this season. So I'd like to ask, like, from your guys' perspective, how do we, who maybe not represent black nor white, advocate our voice without stepping on the black narrative? Like, I want to step in and do racial justice. And in my context, right now, they're just keeping it among the black community. Is it, like, I don't know socially if it's okay for me to say, hey, I want into this, or if it's just not my place yet, and that's okay. But where do we stand as people who maybe not be one or the other?
Great question. I think you should take that. You got it. You guys.
I could say some things, but I think there is a healthy respect that I really appreciate as an African American, where even just your question is saying, okay, I understand that this is an experience I don't want to co-opt. This is a movement I don't want to co-opt. That being said, and again, this is just me, and I'm not a panelist, is that, you see how they did that? They just switched me up like that? Anyway, I would say also it takes, and speaking within the family of God, it does take for us as African Americans within the church also a posture of humility to say it's not just the African American story that's a story of oppression in this culture and in this country. That you are my sister, and as much as I'm asking you to labor for me, I should be concerned and should labor for you and with you in a way that is appropriate and that you would welcome me into your spaces. So I don't know, my experience has been very much here in Seattle where, yes, I'm working in black spaces, but I'm also working with a lot of different sisters and brothers who are coming from other cultural spaces, who are biracial, and we have to labor and share one another's burdens. So I don't think it's just for me as an African American Christian to say, you don't have a place here. But I think we can be laboring together and can share the struggle together. So that's not very thoughtful, but maybe someone else would like to jump in.
Because I sit in this divide, even on this panel, in between African American and Asian, because I am Chinese and black, I feel you for sure. And I think that my experience and being in this conversation and having to have navigated that just within my own being and within my own body, that there's a richness there that one needs to be heard and needs to be tapped into that isn't yet identified, I think, in a larger context. And so, yes, we get into these conversations, and the dominant becomes in terms of where you are single identity, in terms of only African American, only white, or only Asian. And so part of that is our conversation in terms of coming into, as we are entering into more of a minority-majority world, or minority-majority country, I should say, that our context for these conversations do need to open up. And that grace needs to be, of course, at the front of that, but how are we entering into these spaces and allowing for that? There's a time and a place for where both is needed. There's a time and a place where, yes, as an African American group, you need to get together and talk and be able to vent, be able to work out your things, both in the white context as well and in Asians. And so like at Quest Church, we're preparing for our annual Faith and Race class. And one of the things recently that we have been doing in the last few years is what are called these caucus groups. And so as part of the larger overall Faith and Race class that lasts a few weeks, one of the sessions we split into these groups where we have white, we have African American, we have Asian and API, and we have Latinx, and we have sometimes a mixed race, and so where people can self-select in terms of where you're going, and to be able to have those kind of family conversations and be encouraged and edified, but also it's within this larger context where we're talking about this unification or reconciliation of what it means as in a whole. And so I don't think that it needs to be either or. I'm always a both and person because I am a both and person. And so I think the more that we lead with that and knowing that it's not one or the other, but it's all coming together. And so I'm both and, but I'm also believe in it's not just top down, bottom up. It's working both ways throughout the whole system that is going to be the most effective. And so I think that learning context and learning where you can exercise your voice and exercise that place is important, but when you do find that space and that place, and hopefully it gets an invitation gets allotted to you to use that, because there is a lot that is there.
Hello, my name is Brian Barrett, and I am visually impaired, and I have a slight version of autism, formerly known as PTD. And anyway, a lot of my life has been going good, but I'm finding out that I'm on my own. It seems like we're told we can be independent, we can do anything we want, but at the moment we try, oh, wait a minute, you can't do that. It's like saying one thing and yet doing another. And I think that we who are disabled should have the same kind of rights and privileges that everyone else has. And it seems like the average person, or the average over at my workplace, they treat us like we are adults, but they mainly have the mentality of, oh, you're 5 years old, you can't do this, you can't do that, you gotta raise your hand, ask a question, all that. And yet, like I said, we're told, you think like adults, you can be independent, do everything like this other people do. But yet, it seems like, I know it isn't accurate, but it seems like the moment I try, or a lot of other blind people, it seems like if they try to do the same thing, there's, oh, well, no, you can't do that. Well, make up your mind. You know, it's like, I'm tired of trying to be the good boy and doing everything accurate. And yet, the side people, they can do anything they want, and that's okay. Side people, they can, do this, do that, and I'm expected, oh, you're going to be the good boy, do as you're told, don't think. It's just, I think African Americans and all that should be an issue, but also the people who can't see or who can't hear or who have a slight mental deal should have a part in this also.
I think that is something that we need to hear more as a society that is a little bit leans more towards ableist in terms of how we think and move through the world. And that is one of the things in terms of learning and listening to new experiences and perspectives that can help reorient our own way of thinking and moving in the world that allows for everyone to be and to flourish. And that's something that we have to work on as a society, as a church, and what that means and what it means to be in those spaces and where are we giving those voices and where are we leaning into those experiences and where we are practicing what that looks like, and to be able to, even in the design of like this conference, like are we thinking in the planning, thinking about how everyone will experience this conference, including those that may not be able to see, not be able to hear, not be able to move into our spaces quite as easily, and how are we intentionally designing around that and allowing space for that.
I just want to mention really quickly that those are very, very valid comments that we've heard, and they have actually helped what we're doing here. But I also want to mention that even in the seminaries, I want to mention that in the seminaries, the experience of the African American church becomes very, very instructive and emblematic for groups getting their voice heard and their experience brought to the table. So it's not an exclusionary thing, it's just an exemplary thing, because that struggle was so foundational to the development of the country over the last 75 years or longer. And you should know, if you just look at the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that act that African Americans were mainly pushing, and other groups too, they brought women into it to kill it. The Southerners did. So that helped women. It passed. That helped women. A lot of the things for differently abled people, well, they've got their own statutes, but some of them also end up being based on that 1964 Civil Rights Act. So what African Americans say is, we're here pushing rights for ourselves that are going to help everybody.
Yeah, and I would just add to this too is the good thing to think about, and one of the things I was trying to constantly think about even for the church plant in the 4 different places of emphasizing for our core convictions, and one of them is justice, because justice is not just race. Justice is not just gender. Justice it's all of these things. It's when God made everything, he said everything was good, and now his shalom has been subject to chaos. And so the question of, even when we're talking about these things, and your comment, brother, was a great comment, that when we're here and we're talking about justice and spirituality, we're talking that justice is the bedrock by which all of these things can be addressed. And there is not one issue that has less need of God's justice to be applied to that injustice, and his shalom that also needs to be applied to that chaos. So I think that's really important to remember as well when we're talking about justice, is that justice is making wrong things right, the way they were supposed to be. And all of these different issues fall underneath that category. Tell them what shalom is. Yeah, the shalom, the peace. And the beautiful picture that I think of is when the seas were raging and Jesus told the waves to stop. that is the good news of the gospel. That the gospel, when he changes everything, when God speaks, it's everything that's in chaos, from creation being fallen at Genesis 3 to being restored perfectly in the new kingdom, in the new heavens and new earth. Shalom, the peace.
So that's actually our time. I want to thank our panelists. Thank you, Jevon, Reverend Dr. Caenisha, Dr. Leong.